Hello and welcome to Project Noon, a platform dedicated to critically and creatively exploring Hindu-Muslim dialogue. I'm joined again today with Professor Arvind Sharma to discuss his book, A Guide to Hindu Spirituality. Before we actually get to the question of spirituality and man's or the human being's relationship, spiritual relationship with the universe and with reality, the question we have to ask is, what is the nature of this reality? What is the nature of the reality we inhabit, or what is the nature of existence itself? With whom we are to be in a relationship?
Yes. So the Hindu position on that is represented by an expression which is used a lot in India. And that expression is Brahma.
Mm.
But not just Brahma, it is often prefaced by the term Sachidananda. So if you were sitting in a sermon at a temple in India, or even in a more secular setting, you will find the person saying we are talking about Sachidananda Brahma. Yeah? Or in some other way, he would refer to Sachidananda Brahma. So what is he saying? And this is, I think, a good starting point for exploring Hindu spirituality. So what is Brahma? So Brahma is this Sanskrit name for the ultimate reality. Often in English writings, the word used is Brahman rather than Brahma, but they are the same word in the different grammatical formulations. The word is neuter and stands for the ultimate reality. It represents the spiritual evolution of a whole people of about 1,000 years. And let me illustrate that by pointing out that in the early hymns of the Vedas, we have the question, what was the wood, what was the tree out of which the gods fashioned heaven and earth? What was there at the beginning, right?
Right.
What was the wood, what was the tree out of which the gods fashioned heaven and earth? In terms of modern chronology adopted about the Vedas, we might say that the question was raised around 1500 BCE. By the time we come to the end of the Vedic corpus, say about 800 or 600 BCE, or even 400, in that zone, time zone, we find the answer. Brahman was the wood. Brahman was the tree, out of which the gods fashioned heaven and earth. That is, this is the ultimate reality. So if one asks the question, do the Hindus have a conception of an ultimate reality of some kind? Then the answer would be, very briefly, yes. And this is the name given to it. I think Shankara says somewhere that it cannot really have a name because every name is a delimitation. Any definition is a delimitation. Right. And you cannot do that with the ultimate reality. But we have to talk about it, so we give it the name. Right. Brahman. Okay. Now, the next step then is to try to understand what the prefix Sachidananda means. And this has been passed in a very interesting way as follows. It really is a combination of three words. Sachidananda is a compound, a samas, right, consisting of Sat, what is true, plus Chit, that is awareness or consciousness, plus Anand or bliss, Sachidananda. So what is the significance of describing Brahman as Sachidananda? And it is very interesting that often the word Brahman or Brahma is not used by itself in normal discourse in India, religious discourse or spiritual discourse. It is called Sachidananda. So there is obviously some significance attached to this. Now, one way of understanding that is to look at it as follows. If I say to you that there is an ultimate reality, what would be your first question to me?
What is well, I mean, that of course means that there is a reality which is not ultimate. There is such a thing as an ultimate reality.
Yeah, there is an ultimate reality, but I think the question would be, is it real? I mean, you are saying God exists.
Right.
Or an ultimate reality exists.
Yeah.
Is it merely a mental formulation? Or is it for real?
Right.
Does it really exist?
Does it exist? Right.
So the answer to that is Sat. Yes. It is true.
Right.
Then you might say, well, if it is true, then I want to know what it is like. Right? Is it like something material? Like a table, a chair, a substance. A material substance, right?
Right.
Or even a material law or something like that. Right. A law of material universe, Or is it something immaterial? Like emotion, thought, idea,
Right.
What is it then? Okay, we accept that. We accept your claim for the time being that it is. But then what is it? What is it like? And the answer to that is Chit. That is, if we want to describe it in terms of our world, or things we are familiar with, then it is more like something immaterial than something material. Look at it this way. What does our experience of life consist of? In its broadest terms. It consists of the body and the mind, right? Or material objects, any material things, like we are now talking, there's an exchange of thoughts. They are immaterial. And we are sitting on our chairs, they are material. Both these are given to us in life, with which we are in constantly, but not consciously in touch, right?
Right.
Material and immaterial, we keep moving out of one and the other, from one into the other, unself-consciously. I pulled a chair and started talking, right? So there was no discontinuity in that, in our normal mode of behavior. Yeah.
Right.
So it is what it is like, more like something immaterial than something material. Okay, so you say, okay, you see your claim, there is a reality, and it is more like something immaterial. There is an ultimate reality. It is more like something immaterial rather than material. But then, is it one or many? Natural question, right? This question is answered by the word Anand, bliss, but in a slightly circuitous way. The argument is that if it was not the only reality, then there would be some other reality which would compromise it and thereby dilute its bliss. By bliss here we mean perfect bliss. So there is an ultimate reality. It is more like something immaterial than material, and it is one. So we can describe this expression in English, Sachidananda, as pointing to a soul spiritual reality. Soul corresponding to bliss or Anand, spiritual corresponding to Chit, and So
Reality.
reality
Yes.
corresponding to it goes in the reverse gear.
Right.
Okay, so this is the position. There is a Sachidananda Brahman. Now, then the second proposition is of the Hindu spiritual path. It can be realized. So the natural question is how? And then the Vedic yogas come into play.
Right. So before we go into the realization part, a few more thoughts that come to mind. Of course, this you might be familiar with this, Professor, but the Muslim philosopher Saint Ibn Arabi uh, talks about a similar kind of parallel of Sat-Chit-Ananda, where he uses the terms wujud as sat, and uh, there are these three terms in Arabic which are derived from the same linguistic root, as it were. There's wujud, there's wijdan, referring to consciousness, and wajd, referring to ecstasy or the spiritual
Very nice.
realization.
Beautiful, yeah.
Right. Wujud, wijdan, and wajd.
Yeah. So uses these three terms.
Right, and all, of course, are originating from the same triliteral root of wujud, or being, or existence.
Yeah.
Right.
Very fine parallel, yeah.
Right.
And actually, even in a way, a cut above this, because the same root is not involved in Sat-Chit-Ananda, but it is involved in in wujud, wajdan.
Yes, wijdan and wajd.
Wijdan and wajd, yeah.
Yes.
Very nice. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Just to and then one further point which I'd like you to maybe clarify if possible. When we say that, of course, absolute reality, Brahman, cannot be two, uh, because of the Ananda implication of that point. I recall reading somewhere that Shankara also says the same thing about Ishvara as well, about Saguna Brahman.
Okay.
At one level, perhaps.
Yes.
And of course, I mean, you might be familiar that the Quran also says that about Allah. It gives a similar kind of argument for why there cannot be two of these absolute realities.
Yeah. Very interesting. So that both Nirguna and Saguna Brahma, and the term is used for both. In Hinduism, Sachidananda Brahma is applied to both Nirguna Brahma as well as Saguna Brahma. Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
Another parallel, yeah.
So, if we can go a bit, further into the nature of this, of the absolute reality, there's of course the idea that it is beyond distinctions, or above distinctions, abheda. What does that entail for our conception of this reality? How are we to think about it?
Well, one way in which this non-dual part of it could be understood is the contrast it presents, this claim of this kind of, to our daily experience.
Right.
Our daily experience of life is marked by bhed, by difference. One object is different from another object. A chair is different from a table. Yeah.
Right.
One person is different from another person. You and I are different. An object is different from a person. So the predominant feature of our normal life is diversity. And the claim is being made that the ultimate reality is without distinction. So no contrast could be more stark and counterintuitive.
Right. I mean, how does it, I mean, how are we to make sense of this? On the one hand, the idea that there is one absolute reality and it cannot be two,
Yeah,
but the world of appearance and the world of interaction.
right. Yeah. So that is where to explain this relationship, we have the concept of Maya.
Hmm.
The contrast between the apparent
Right.
and the real. So we can build towards this on the basis of our normal experiences. The value, the significance of this distinction. Yeah? Let's consider the fact that you are at your home now, right?
Right.
Or in your office.
Home. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
But you probably work in a hospital, right?
Right.
And you drive there or walk there.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that the earth is a sphere, right? Then why don't we take precautions against rolling off the earth? When I walk from my office, my home to my office, or vice versa, right?
Right.
You see the contrast?
Right. I mean, reality is one way, but our experience of it is
The opposite.
completely different. Right. Yeah.
Different, yeah.
Right.
You see the contrast?
Right.
Another experience of daily life. We decided that we'd meet at 2 p.m.
Right.
How do we decide what is the meaning of PM? Post meridian. What is the meridian? Sun at the zenith. What is it based on? The assumption that the sun goes around the earth. Does the sun go around the earth?
Of course not. Right.
The earth goes around the sun.
Right.
The same problem we had earlier.
Right.
What is real and what appears is radically opposed.
Right.
Here we have another example. So this kind of radical opposition is a part of our experience, normal experience. So it should not be appear too outlandish.
Right.
So just as we can encounter these two levels of truth, as they are called, I wonder whether there is any conceptualization in terms of two levels of truth in Islamic thought.
I wouldn't be able to reference anything right now. I'll have to look it up probably.
Yeah, but something worth looking for. Yeah,
right,
thinking
of
about.
course. Yeah.
Because it is shared in India by Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. All
Right.
three.
I think, I mean, there is certainly that distinction. I don't know if it is spelled out in those terms exactly, but there's that distinction between what we have in Hinduism as the Vyavaharika and the Paramarthika perspective.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
That's part of this.
Right. So I think that distinction is obviously made because it is understood that the absolute reality is Nirguna in nature.
Yeah,
and the world of manifestation is a lower level of reality. But reality on its highest level must be understood as one and as the.
Yeah.
So there must be some way of, I don't know how it translates in an epistemological sense of how you, whether they have that theory or that lens of looking at it. Right.
Yeah. Because to establish ultimate non-duality,
right.
Yeah, there is a further step. Is the distinction between the ultimate reality and the proximate reality, let us call it, or the immediate reality, or the empirical reality, is the distinction itself ultimate or empirical?
Right. So I think the Hindu view is it that it is the distinction itself is also not an
It's
absolute one.
empirical. Exactly.
Right.
And therefore, all that you are left with is the absolute.
Mm. Right. Right, of course. Well,
And
sorry.
it's
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's just. I mean, just one small point. This just reminds me of what you were asking. Uh, I think there is certainly that perspective in many, Islamic traditions and Sufis, and even in certain ahadiths, where distinction is made between things as they are and how they appear to us.
yes,
And of
that
course,
would be
there's also a very interesting prayer by the Prophet where he asks, "Oh God, show me things as they are. Arin al haqqa haqqan. Show me reality as it is." Right.
uh, yeah, they would qualify.
Right.
That is the underlying motivation here.
Right.
To understand the distinction between the actual and the apparent,
Right.
the manifest and the real.
Right.
Yeah, and that is shared. That's very nice. Yes.
Right. Right. So
There is this,
yes.
if I may,
Yes.
if I just intervene for a moment,
Of
I
course.
read somewhere that there is a hadith about the Prophet saying that all life is a dream or something, and we
Um.
have to awake.
Right. I think there is one hadith, which or one narration, uh, attributed. I think in some circles it is attributed to the Prophet, in some I think to Hazrat Ali. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But of course, it's a really popular one where which says that "An-nasu yunam," mankind is asleep, and when they die, they awake. That is the one.
And the die there.
Yeah, that is one which is used, I think.
Okay.
But I think
So
there's certainly a case to be made for looking at the world as Leela or divine play,
yes,
because
yes.
I mean that word of play is certainly used in the Quran to refer to the life of the world.
The word is there,
Yeah,
lila.
I mean, la'ib. Of course, it refers to that in a lower sense, as if as if to say that this is not actual reality. Where
This
it
is mere
says,
play.
yeah, it is mere play. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
So here we have an interesting parallel also. If we develop our discussion further, that if the ultimate reality of Brahman is to be viewed as either Nirguna or Saguna, yeah, then the discussion which we have been having right now is mainly along the Nirguna lines, right?
Right.
Right. So what happens when we go to the Saguna? So when we go to the Saguna, what happens is that the personal God is the ultimate reality,
Right.
a Saguna God, yeah?
Right.
And the world becomes a magic show,
Mm.
and God is the magician.
Mm. Right.
And an argument could be made that if we want to look upon the relationship between the world and the ultimate reality in terms of these two categories, Nirguna and Saguna, then the word Maya is more appropriate for describing the relationship between Nirguna Brahman
Mm.
and the world or Sansar, and Leela for the relationship between Sagun Brahman
Right.
and and the world of Sansar.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. Right. Um, so there is this reality, uh, Now the question is, how are we to approach or know that reality? And of course, one approach could be encountering it as the other, the absolute other, as is done in many, religious spiritual traditions. But another approach could be to recognize that the ground of all reality is the same, so the ground of the self itself also shares in that same reality. So there are these two approaches, as it were, that can be taken, right?
Yes, yes. So either the ultimate becomes the intimate
Right.
in the formulation you are offering.
Mm, right.
It is it's like saying there is eternity. Okay. If there is eternity, it must be present now also.
Right.
Right now.
Mm,
Right? Right now.
yes.
This is eternity.
Right.
And if there is infinity,
Mm,
then it has to run through the finite.
right.
So it must be here right now too.
Mm.
So
Oh,
this is how the ultimate becomes the intimate. Yeah.
right. Brilliant. So, so now, I mean, I suppose on a theoretical level, we have some clarity about the nature of this reality, or at least some idea or some outline of it. Of course, that is not enough for spirituality. And in order for
Yeah.
philosophy to be translated into spirituality, there needs to be an extra uh, experiential effort. Uh,
Why,
what
why,
could that look at? Right. Yeah.
why should we be interested in
Right.
it?
Right. Right.
Suppose it is there, it is ultimate, it is more like something immaterial, it is even bliss,
Right.
Of a transcendental kind. But what is it to us?
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
So I think if you look at the material, the Hindu from the Hindu side and the Buddhist side, especially if they are taken together, and you will find that there are two approaches to this answering this question. Why should we be interested in it? And one of them is that so long as our life is going on as is normal, right? Yeah. We are leading our daily life. There are no major upheavals. We have our moments of joy and some moments of disappointments. But we feel that on the balance, it's a positive experience and we go on living. We are shaken from this attitude by two considerations. If we encounter intense tragedy, or if we encounter intense bliss. When we experience intense tragedy, we want to get out of that tragic state of affairs. Right?
Right.
You might call it the negative motivation.
Right.
When we experience moments of intense ecstasy, we want to ask, is there something more ecstatic? Is there something more than this?
Right.
Yeah. This point is very well illustrated in one of the Upanishads, where the bliss quotient of the various states of beings is compared. If you are a human being, you have a certain quotient to experience bliss. If you become a semi-divine being, the quotient rises. If you become a divine being, and there are several categories, and it goes on till you have the experience of Brahman, which sort of blows the circuit.
Right.
So that could be other reason. So one positive and one negative. A nice secular formulation of the positive one is found in Aldous Huxley. I paraphrase him, and I may got the illustrations a bit wrong, but what he says is basically something like this. He says, after you have read Shakespeare and heard Beethoven and seen the Mona Lisa, you ask, is this all?
Right.
And there the enthusiastic answer from the Hindu-Buddhist side is, no, this is not all.
Right. Of course. Of course. So there is that, there is the idea that this is not all, and that there is an even greater bliss, an infinitely greater
Yes.
bliss to be found.
Yeah.
But now the question remains, how do we get from here to there? How do we get from where we are to that state?
Before we go into that, I want to connect this, what we
Yes.
have just discussed, with Sachidananda.
Right.
Because one interpretation of Sachidananda is that it is actually the description of the bliss or the experience of Brahman. That when you experience Brahman, you say, oh, this is it. Sat, this is the truth. This is the real. Yeah?
Right.
Ultimate in your experience of what is real.
Right.
Chit. Oh, this is the ultimate expanded awareness. So, the ultimate in Sat, the ultimate in Chit, and the ultimate in Anand are there in the ultimate reality. We find a very interesting interpretation of this in Joseph Campbell. He writes somewhere that he got this key term, Sat-Chit-Ananda, as the key to life. I discussed so much in Sanskrit literature. So he said, I asked myself, what is the truth about me? He's moving it to the person instead of the ultimate reality. So he says, what is the truth about me? He said, I don't know. Then he says, what is the truth about my awareness? He says, I don't know. But where is my bliss? Oh, I know that. In doing what I feel most blessed, most blissful. And then he adds, so I thought I will follow my bliss. And I think it worked. So there's a very modern, teasingly suggestive application of Sachidananda. This is an enterprise, right? Spiritual enterprise.
Right.
Anything we start, anything new we start, if we want to accomplish something, what do we start with? We start with ourselves, right? Whatever resources we have, right? We try to achieve our goal with whatever resources we have. So what resources do we have as a human being? Well, we have a body and a mind. So, according to the Hindu view of life, you can start with the body itself. And how that might be done is discussed in Hatha Yoga. The Hatha Yoga is based on the principle that there is a correlation between physical states and mental states.
Right.
For instance, we could not have this discussion while we were running.
Right.
There's a mental state that we are in correlated to a physical state.
Right.
So the Hatha Yoga argues that using this correlation, you can generate mental states by putting your body in certain physical states. And there's the elaborate discussion of the asanas. and which asana will generate what kind of mental state and a corresponding spiritual state, if possible. So that's Hatha Yoga.
Right.
Then you look at the mind. So from the point of view, the material is dealt with in Hinduism. An interesting description of the mind, nature of the mind, is to view it as something which thinks, an entity which thinks, which feels, and which wills. So if we focus on the thinking part of the mind, okay, let us imagine a person, So the person is like you and me. We are not that much interested in the physical, right?
Right.
Using the body as the
Right.
starting point. You rather
Right.
do it with the mind,
Right.
right? But our mind may be interested in art and literature and music. Yeah. It may be interested in philosophical reflection, the kind of which we are indulging in.
Right.
Or it may be more actively disposed, like an executive style of thinking. You want to organize things, run organizations,
Right.
businesses, banks, And you can associate the thinking part with as I discussed, the three functions of the mind, the philosophical part with the thinking, the art type with the emotion, and the business type with willing.
Right.
So for those whose mental component is characterized primarily by thinking, you have Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. For those whose disposition is characterized by feeling, have Bhakti Yoga.
Right.
And those whose disposition is characterized by willing, have Karma Yoga.
Right.
So you have this, at the moment, a fourfold scheme covering various aspects of our body and mind. So depending on where we are as an individual, we start with the yoga appropriate for us. We can discuss these yogas individually, in more detail at some other session if we continue to have these conversations. But let me say a few words by way of explaining the idea of yoga in general, which is a word used for all of them, with all of them. So one way in which the word yoga is explained in philology is by connecting it with an Indo-European root, which also links it with the English word yoke.
Right.
That is bringing two things together, as when you yoke the oxen to the plow. And it also has the meaning of discipline, right? When India was under the British yoke. So any discipline which unites the human being with God, or the ultimate, is yoga.
Does religion also have a similar root in Latin or Greek? Is it religare, to bind?
I am not aware at the moment of the Indo-European connection of religion with the Sanskrit.
Right.
But I am reminded of the word dharma, which actually in English has the word form, F-O-R-M.
Yeah.
Is philology connected with dharma?
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Okay. So strictly speaking, there are as many yogas as there are individuals.
Right.
Yeah. Strictly. But let me try to provide an illustration to carry this point further. Suppose we decided to meet. This is making two ends meet, right?
Right.
Yoga, right?
Yeah.
You and I meet. Okay. How would we do that? If we met and somebody made a chart of our movements from where I start in Montreal, if I movement from you in your case,
Right.
you could plot the whole a line for each one of us, right? You start from somewhere, I start from somewhere. And if there are 3 or 4 of us walking, I with my family meeting, you with your family, then we'll have more lines crisscrossing. Yeah? Okay. But all these lines will be totally individual, right? From where you start, from where I start, from my members of the family start, from your members of the family start. Yeah?
Right.
They'll be all individual. But we will be using mainly, we will be traveling either by air or part of the way by air, part of the way by road, part of the way by train. So despite the fact that we'll be having these individual routes, strictly speaking, there are as many yogas as you and me and any individual, we can meaningfully speak of Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Karma Yoga, because although we are all traveling by our individual routes, we are either going by plane or by train or by car. So this is the logic. This is how you link up the extreme radical position that there are as many yogas as there are individuals.
Right.
With the idea that you can reduce these yogas to 3, 4, 5, or 6, main yogas.
Right. Right. So, I mean, at this point, I'd be interested to know how we can plot this out in terms of realizing the identity of the Atman as Brahman. So, in terms of how would you plot it out in terms of Jnana, Bhakti, and Karma Yoga?
Right. So next time we should talk about Jnana Yoga.
Right.
It will take some time to
right,
spell it out.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, it's an entire topic in itself, and I think we should reserve it for the next session if possible.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a good idea, I think.
Yeah.
We'll maintain a certain continuity in our discussions.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. So we all hang together in the end.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, thank you, Professor, for your time again.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me for this.